Hello, everyone. Can you guys hear me? Just give me a thumbs up. Hello, hello. It's good to see you. All right, let's get this started. As thank you. Okay, awesome. As per usual, this it's a slightly bigger room than usual, and so we start with all the mics muted. So this class is gonna have two parts. First, Dennis will be finishing the cue that he started mixing last week. It's already finished, so he's gonna be adding in the tracks that he worked on. Just so you know, this is being recorded, so don't worry. We'll send the replay link later on. And so two parts: showing the track that has been finished, and then he'll be talking about the tracks that he added, so percussion, etc. And then he'll be talking about some mastering in the stereo master bus, a little bit of compression and the brickwork limiter, and then we'll open for Q&A. In that part, just raise your hand, we'll unmute the mic, and we'll have a little bit of a Q&A. All right, as always, it is an honor and a total pleasure to have Dennis Sanz with us today. I'm super excited for this session. Thank you as well for everyone interested in this topic and for being here today on an Eastern Saturday. So, other than that, thank you, Dennis again. Thanks everyone. Let's get started.
Hey, everybody. Again, I want to say as well, thank you for being here. I know it's a holiday weekend, and appreciate your time and interest in this. Um, I think we'll just get started. First, I'm going to play a bit of this track so you see where we left off last week, and then I'll add in the remaining tracks. There's a couple things I want to discuss, show you a couple plugins. And then, as Mark mentioned, a little bit of mastering compression plugins, which are great and very effective and useful. And then we'll have a little Q&A. So first of all, here is our track as we left it. Okay, now the first thing, the first track I want to add in is this what's called Epic Ensemble, and I'm going to turn off plugins and just play this. And the whole idea of this track, obviously, is to give an impact and size, but uh, I felt it needs a little bit of help. So the first thing I added, and we talked about this. This is this tape emulation. It's we talked about it last week, and I've used it on some of the earlier tracks. This is an emulation of an analog tape machine that was very popular way back in the day. I actually owned one of these in a studio I had in another life. Anyway, um, so here's without it, and here's with it. And you can hear that it makes actually quite a difference in the sonic quality of it. Again, just adding a richer, a better, tighter bottom end and all. And then maybe most importantly is this plugin. This is from Plugin Alliance. It's this is a channel strip, if you will, from an emulation of a Neve console. Neve consoles are very distinctive in their look. These knobs, everything is very, very traditional, and also the color of these modules. But most importantly, these darn things sounded incredible. Um, uh, and honestly, all I did was select this preset. Here are the presets, and this what's called drums parallel compression. For those who don't know, parallel compression is the concept of having a track play and a compressor next to it, parallel to it. So you have the original track and then the compression mixed in with it, as opposed to the track going completely through the compressor. So the idea and it gives you the ability to put as much of the compression in as you want, but still have the dry track. And additionally, with this plugin, there's a little bit of EQ. There's some high frequency added here as a what's called a shelf, where it's a preset frequency, and I'm just adding some over to the plugin. The preset adds some, and then some low frequency at 110 cycles, and nothing in the mid range, and no high pass filter. And here's what this does. That's pretty impressive. Again, just a preset. I haven't done anything. It just turned it on, and it just sounds really good. It just gives that bottom end, that gives this drum a much bigger dimension and a much bigger impact into the track. It also has a gate, which is not in. A couple things to notice here on the compressor. Again, this is all part of the preset, but you have these in addition to it being in, of course, you have these two settings here. Please notice the smash one. That's just really a hard, strong compression. So it's really, pushing it in, and squeezing it very hard. So in other words, it's getting rid of whatever dynamics there is, but you don't want dynamics in it. You just want impact, and that's what this is doing. And then finally, I created a reverb, and this is with that in. This is the whole track now treated. So we went from this to this. And you can tell it's just a completely different element now. And this took me literally about 4 minutes to do. So this is nothing. It's nothing genius. It's nothing brilliant. It's just understanding what you want to do conceptually for the mix, and what tools to reach for. So now it's added into the mix. Without it. Without it. In. So it's really making a difference in terms of the impact of this track.
If I may
And
ask, Dennis, there's a question in regards to what's the reverb that has been added.
okay, let me find it. It is this here. Um, this is a plugin called Seventh Heaven from Liquid Sonics. This is a allegedly a copy of a Bricasti M7 stereo reverb. Uh, I have a number of these Bricastis. They're hardware devices. Quite honestly, it's not. It's not the same, but these again. It's a very effective, uh, very useful um, reverb choice. And what I'm trying to do here, as well as in my programs, that I do, I'm trying to show a variety of plugins that are really good quality, useful, versatile um, plugins. This is one of them. So again, I'm always looking for presets. So first of all, you have two levels of presets. You have the basic overall style of reverb, a hall, and here it is. Interiors. So for example, people in post production would use it if you're trying to create, like you have a dialogue and you have somebody in a room, and you want to, create that sense of that space. That's what this is doing. Uh, Nonlinear is a type of reverb that was very popular in the 80s. It's a gated uh, reverb that you've heard many times in records, plates, rooms, and kind of large spaces. And so that's the overall choice. And then once you make a choice, now you have all these other sub choices, which are specific to the type of reverb you choose. Excuse me. And then there's a few other controls you have as well: uh, decay time, EQ, etc. Really a nice plugin. Again, I just wanted to show another type of uh, reverb choice. So that's what this reverb is. And again, I chose this medium and deep preset, and that's what this is. I felt it worked well. I didn't want a real long reverb. Again, this is a huge sound. Um, if I had a very long reverb, it would tend to muddy the rest of the track. This 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 kind of cue, and I'm imagining it as a piece of music, let's say for a film or TV or some media. I know that there's other stuff going on. A lot of times there's dialogue, there's other sound effects, there's action, things happening. You want to make sure that you leave space. So you got to be very careful with reverbs which take up space. But the beauty of them, they add dimension and size. But unless this is a standalone piece of music, which I don't imagine it that way, um, I try to be very careful about reverb time. So I chose a shorter, tighter reverb. Um, okay, so that's this track. Next track, is this pulse, and I didn't do very much to it, but except this thing. Um, this is a really interesting compressor. It's called an Omnipressor. I think I probably have it on some earlier tracks from last week. It can be a very, very intense compressor, which I really like to help bring out lighter sounds inside of a bigger kind of bulkier track, which this track has a lot of uh, kind of drum energy. So for these kinds of sounds, the thing about the pulse is we have a lot of big drums. We have this low pulse. So how do I get the big drums to really feel have all that great energy that we want, but still have this pulse, which is a lower frequency pulse, also give the motor that tension that is important in this kind of a track. So I found that this compressor seemed to work pretty well, and so. And without it, play it again here without it. So it keeps it just kind of bubbling in there. And then I showed you these two Tycos last time. They're they're the same as they were. And then we have here is and this track is just giving a little how would I characterize it? Just a little texture to that drum pattern. Obviously, there's no bottom end. There's nothing like that to it. It wants to give a little uh, distinct, make the notes more distinctive in that drum pattern. That's the purpose of this track. And I just mixed it in, just so that it gives a little clarity to that drum pattern. And here's let's see how this does here. And this, to me, these two are really, it's really one sound. That's one sound that works together. They just happen to be in the two separate. Let's see here. So they're obviously two different sounds, but the truth is they work simultaneously together. I really see them as one sound. But interestingly, this top, it's called Perk Middle Left. It's truly most of the sound is on the left, and then the other side, most is on the right. But together, it actually works quite well as a single sound, and leaving the pans as they exist. So uh, it the cool thing about it is it feels like one sound, but there is a separation. So you have the left and right thing, excuse me, working very well together. And what it does is it helps give a size and dimension to that stereo mix with the pulse. So here is that in the track. And let's see I what I have here is the way I've treated these tracks. Here's the left side. Out. This is yet another plug-in. Uh, this is an emulation of a SSL console, solid state logic 9000. This by the way was I worked on these many times. This was also a great sounding console. I was never a huge fan of SSL consoles until this 9000 series, and it just sounded really beautiful. Great microphone preamps, beautiful sound. SSL consoles were very popular for record mixers and records in general. Still are, as a matter of fact. But this is another channel strip, obviously. Similar kind of thing. Dynamics, this is high pass, low pass filters. Dynamics, I'm not using the filters. I am using some of the compression and some of the equalization here. And it's out. That's it. Just want to make it a little fuller, a little bigger sounding. And for the other side, this is a different, another channel strip. This is a Neve console, is what this is. A newer version of a Neve console. Here's out, and so again, similar kind of idea. Just a little bit of EQ and a little bit of compression. And again, together in the track. Okay, moving along. I know this might be going a little fast, but I'm trying. Want you to hear, as much of this as we can, so we can get to your questions. These are, and you can look at the waveform here. You see that these are very light elements, but they give a really cool texture to the track. So here, and I think my compliments to Mark who wrote this and created this track. It's a great color on top of all this big stuff going on. And the thing about this stuff is actually really can cut through the track quite well. But what I had done, I did add some plugins, some friends here. So this is without it. So it in order to keep it really working well, again, Omnipressor, and just this will give you a good example of what this device does. Here's without it, and in. Sorry, without, in. So it just really gives it an intensity that that I like, and it just helps so much in the mix. And here's the other side now, out and in. Sorry, I'll play it again. In, out. So there's both of them now. And then what I did is I added these two reverbs, or this reverb. It's the same reverb. And the reverb is, I'll show it to you. All right, let me find it here. It's this guy. I think I mentioned this last time as well. It's a plate reverb. Um, I really, really like this plugin a lot. I use it a ton. Um, Again, it's an emulation of an EMT 140 plate. They're still they're still they're not long since been discontinued manufacture, but you can still find them around for those ever interested. Again, they were a gigantic box. They're really heavy, and this huge metal plate inside with an actuator and a receiver, one on either end, and then a damper to control how long the decay time was on the plate. But it's a very cool sound, and I use these a lot, especially for higher percussion uh, tracks. It's just there's something so cool about it, but it's also great for vocals and even orchestral elements, strings, and all. It just got a great quality to them. It's that. It's a really really nice sound, and it helps these tracks kind of speak inside of this huge uh, track. So. Okay, now here are the rest of these. I'm going to add these in quickly. Here are these guys. And here are these guys. So it's, again, these tracks are just enhancing this big drum, kind of moment, or sorry, this big drum elements. This is just more enhancement. It's more color for those that compositional element. So again, this is now with everybody in it. So I've made it through the track, but obviously what's happening now is the drums are dominating, which we want the drums to be really rocking, but I need to make the strings. Need to get the strings back into the track here. So I have kind of automated this whole thing already, and I'm going to turn on the automation, and let me go over here. So if you look at the screen, I've done at this point almost all the moves via the VCAs over here. And I think I described them the last time, but the the advantage of the VCA is, as opposed to, let's say, just grouping the tracks. So for example, strings here. So if I solo this up, you see here are all my string tracks here, right here. Now I could just group them, and then if I were to grab one of the faders, the whole group would move as I move the one fader. The problem with that is, let's say I'm doing a move, but I want to make an internal adjustment on one or two or three or whatever of these tracks. Well, if I've grouped them, I can't do that. It's really clumsy. I'd have to turn off the group, then I go and make the ride and do the, and then turn the group back on and do some. It's very clumsy and time consuming. The beauty of doing the VCA is these guys aren't grouped. They're all linked to this fader. So when I move it, these faders move. But I can move this fader, but still move any of these others simultaneously. So I can make adjustments internally as I go. And from a time standpoint, that's a big advantage. And just artistically, it's an advantage too, because a lot of mixing is performance. You're creating a sound as you're mixing, so there's a performance aspect involved, and this just helps enhance that performance. It gives you that added ability and latitude to make those artistic choices as you go. And so, anyway, here is the mix automated. So I was able to get the strings, pretty much into the track. And I would, given the more time, I would undoubtedly make a few more adjustments here and there. But again, I still wanted to keep the drums big, because that's such an important element in this track. But we needed the strings, and also we needed these guys here, which are it's the motor, the Marcato string part inside of the string section. So I was able to push the strings, but still push these guys even more. So inside of as the track moved along, the strings are giving us a really nice constant motion. And then I wanted to show one other aspect here, and this is sort of some overall stereo compression. So we've got our mix, okay, I'm pretty good with the mix. And now if I want to just give a little more intensity to the track. Um, I really like this device. This is also from Plug-in Alliance. It's called, this is Shadow Hills mastering compressor. And there's actually two compressors here in it. There's one, this optical compressor, which is out. I don't, if this was more of a like a rock track, I would probably use this as well. But this discrete other compressor is the one that I primarily use. It looks complicated, but it's really, if you know about compressors, this is really many ways quite standard. Um, there's some few extra knobs here. This is just selects what the meter does. But here are this section of the main knobs. Now, when you're in the stereo mode on this device, the left side controls both the left and right side. Okay, so you really only need to deal with these knobs right here, and it's, this handles, this is the setting for the whole compressor. So you have, ratio, attack, release, threshold, and overall gain, and that's it. And then there's one other thing that's kind of cool, or a couple other things that are cool about this. There are actually three different types of transformers, and that this actually does affect the sound. These are just, a transformer. They're just pieces of metal that actually affect the sound quality. And you have your choice of three settings here. And then you have a side chain in and out. The side chain, with the compressor, the compressor acts on overall level. So you set a threshold, and you're telling the compressor, anything that goes over this threshold, I want you to act on it. In other words, hold back the level based on these other settings: the ratio, the attack, how quickly the compressor reacts, the release, how quickly it lets go once it's done functioning and that moment in time. Well, what the sidechain does, the thing about level is, if you think about frequency range, you go from low frequency to high frequency. High frequencies need less level to be heard. So in your mix, to hear low frequency, you need more level. But what happens? A compressor doesn't distinguish between frequencies. It doesn't know a low frequency level from a high frequency level. It just sees overall level. So if you have a lot of low end, like this track does, you have, and the low frequencies are creating a louder level. The compressor is going to react more to the low frequencies than the high frequencies, and you don't necessarily want that. And so what this sidechain does, and you see here is it's high pass sidechain filter, this control right here, which, by the way, does not exist on the hardware device. I have a hardware device of this particular compressor in my studio. This thing doesn't exist. This is only in the plug-in, which is kind of a nice control. And this allows you to set the frequency where the compressor will react. So in other words, the higher frequency, you notice, maybe hard for you to, if you can see the screen, is just showing me, right here it's set at about, let's say, 200 cycles. So what this is doing is telling the compressor, don't react to anything below 200 cycles. So in other words, you're controlling the amount of compression based on frequency, on that low frequency. So you're not letting it react as much to the low frequency. Okay, so here's let me just, and these are just some settings. I have a very low ratio. I've found a threshold that I like. A very quick release. In other words, I want it to allow the to not hold back the level too long, so it comes back quicker, and a relatively quick attack. And then and this is what I have, and I have this transformer setting, this top setting, which is nickel. These are three different types of metal. There's nickel, iron, and steel. What the nickel is the most transparent. So it's the one I use primarily, especially for for orchestra, if I'm doing that, using this on that. So here's without it. And here's it in. Now, so I'm not doing a lot with it, but it's just creating, giving it a little bit. Now, we can increase it like this. Without. So you see, it's, and this is all to taste. It's like, how much compression do you want? Some kind of tracks you want more, some less. You don't have to use this at all, but um, it's this kind of thing is very significant in a lot of styles of music. Pop music, rock and roll. Um, even this style of this sort of driving intense track, this is kind of a cool added element. And then one last thing worth showing is this device. This is called, and I usually use these in conjunction with one another. This is called a brick wall limiter. And what this does is you have a threshold point. I have it at 0 and usually leave it at that. And what this does is it does nothing until the volume level hits this threshold, and then it stops the level. It just, the brick wall. It's, as you imagine what a brick wall would do. It just prevents any level. In other words, you don't want level, so much level that it creates in the digital realm what's called overs, or excessive. You can't have excessive level, or it's really ugly. It distorts, it crackles. It's a terrible sound in the digital realm. So this prevents that. So no matter how much level you have on a track, this won't let the level exceed this point. So it prevents any of these other anomalies to happen, in technically in the digital, in the recordings. So it's a very handy device, and it's very, very transparent when it's not acting on anything. So there's no real effect to your sonically to your track until it hits the threshold. And this is with everything. Okay, So that's it. And I think right now we open the floor to questions.
That's awesome. Rock and roll. There's many comments here. It's like all of a sudden this sounds like a blockbuster. And
Cool.
it in regards of that, there's a question that I'll read, which has to do with the different mediums. Like, do you approach mixing differently for TV or library music than for film? Also, do you consider that a film might be built on a laptop, for example? So different mediums, and if you mix different for them.
Yes, mostly for me, it has more to do with monitoring than mixing per se. Um, I have a number of different monitoring systems. For film, I have a large film chain in my studio. Um, that's it's same system that's in many theaters. It's a Myers Sound Asheron 80 system and Myers surround monitors, and that's specifically for film, for cinema, theatrical exhibition. For television, I have a PMC MB3A system for the screen channels, and I use the same Myers system for surrounds. Um, I do primarily work in the multi-channel format, but also I do a lot of stereo as well. But the difference in the systems is that in the film realm, uh, there's an equalization curve that exists in all movie theaters, called the X curve, and it creates a roll off in the high frequencies starting at around 2,000 cycles, and I think it's about I'm, I believe it's around 3 dB per octave, something like that. And I might be off on that exactly, but there is a roll off curve, so the high frequency gets diminished as the frequency number increases. The and the reason is that, or the concept of it initially is that in a large theater, um, the perceived uh, um, for us, we perceive higher frequencies easier over distance than lower frequencies. In other words, we hear higher frequencies from if I'm quite a ways back. Let's say I'm in the middle of the a large movie theater. I'm sitting in the middle row. I perceive the higher frequencies easier than the lower frequencies. It's just the way our hearing works, our brains and all. So what the the idea to deal with that is roll off the high frequency, so we're hearing less of it is coming to me. So at a particular volume level, which is preset in the movie theater, less higher frequencies are coming to me than lower frequencies. So because of the way our hearing works, it sort of equalizes itself out. So we're here allegedly hearing the proper, you know, frequency, the proper balance. Um, Personally, I'm not uh, at this point in time. I'm not a huge fan of this X curve, but and a lot of people kind of agree with that, but it still exists. So in my studio, so like I said, my monitoring, it has X curve built into it, and I use that for theatrical cinematic work. For television, my PMC system does not have that. It's a full range system. Um, so or for if it's doing video games or anything at all that basically are full range um, capability, I use that system. So that's sort of my approach to mixing is still quite similar, um, for regardless of what I'm doing. I always think of balance and depth and things like that, regardless of whatever format it is. But the monitoring is the thing that changes the most. I hope that answers the question.
Awesome. Thanks, Dennis. All right, I've got a few questions, but anyone that has a question, just raise your hand, and let's go for it. I think that you can unmute the mics. Stuart, go ahead. There
Hi,
you go.
yes. Just a quick question with regard to convolution reverb. I noticed you added it to the orchestral instruments, but not some of the others. Can you give some tips on that, please? And also with bass frequencies, how you handle reverb with the lower frequencies to stop it from becoming muddy.
That's actually two very good questions. The convolution reverb that I use, it was the Altiverb. I really like for realistic room sounds, specifically for, I use it quite a bit for orchestral elements, samples that are where you're trying to create a sense of the orchestra playing together. So, first of all, and samples vary so much depending on the library, um, because the you're it's so much about how the sample was recorded as to how much room you would put in. A lot of samples are quite present, which is very functional and useful in many cases. But if you're trying, let's say you have a first violin legato patch that you're using, and it has a lot of presence to it. Well, again, that's can be very effective, tonally or artistically, creatively as a composer. But if you want it to sound orchestral let's say in a concert hall, and it has a lot of presence, you have to create that space. It's just the way it is. So that's why I used a combination of two reverbs. The first thing I do is the room, and I like to, you can use, again, the great thing about the Altiverb is you have a huge variety of choices for that space, and there's some, I like the Todd AO. There's some other great choices of a studio, also concert halls. There's some really, really awesome options for concert halls as well. Um, so I do use that, and then I add a hall reverb, and that's sort of generally speaking how I approach an orchestral setup. Now, if in addition to that, in this case with this particular track, we have all those big drums, uh, the drums are functioning as they're giving us this impact. It's about impact and size. I don't want it washed out in a room. I want presence to it. Now, you know, the the artistry in it is to make these two kind of basic elements working together to have them make sense and have them feel like they're still part of the same piece of music and not two different things happen and play at the same time. So, um, with these big drums, I tend to not, unless it's a really specific effect I want, I try to use like these medium length reverbs. Not you want it to have size, but you want to be careful about the reverb time because if it's too long, then it will get muddy, especially as the hits, if the hits are, if it happens quite often, you have a long reverb tail. Each one's going to create yet more reverb, more reverb, more reverb. And then it's going to get messy. And what'll happen is now you'll be covering up the other elements you want, like the inside of the string voicings or whatever. So in order to maintain transparency, you want to be careful in lower frequencies with reverb time. So use shorter reverbs. Even the gated reverbs, by the way, what I think I mentioned earlier, the nonlinear reverbs can be actually quite effective. It won't sound effecty if it's inside as the track plays. It can give you a dimension to the sound, but it goes away quickly, which is good because when it goes away, that means it's leaving space for other things. So,
Thank you, Dennis.
for the lower frequency stuff, if you're gonna add reverb, you want it to be unless it's a big effect. Let's say you have one big boom, and you want the tail to be really long. Let's say it's the end of a piece, big boom and long tail. Then you have this latitude to have a big, huge reverb with a long tail. It's cool. It's a great effect. It's fun. That's nice. But
Yeah.
you need the space to do that. You know what I mean? In other words,
Yeah.
if I was to put a big long reverb on these hits, it'd be a mess. It really would. And it just would completely destroy what I'm trying to do here.
Yeah. That's great. Thank you very much.
Welcome. Thank you.
Terrence?
Yes, hello. How
Hi.
you doing? How you doing?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing fine. I have a question. You spoke about multi-channel formats earlier. How do you go about preparing your reverbs for Dolby Atmos for like, your fars, your nears or your mids? Do you leave that up to the re-recording engineer or do
Never.
you do something? Okay, that's what I would like to know. Okay, okay.
No, and you know, I've had bad experiences in the past, and that's why I've I've made that mistake where
Okay.
oh yeah, I'm going to leave it up to the next guy. Yeah, and I don't fault anybody. Everybody's under pressure, time for they're not going to. And like the re-recording guy, they've got the backfield, the people behind them barking at them. They're under the gun with a clock, all that stuff. They're not. They have their own agenda, and
Mhm.
rightfully so. By the way, it's not a criticism. It's. I understand what it is. Um, so I always take the approach that look, I'm going to make it right as I feel the music. I'm going to make the music as best I can make it as I feel it should be, and as a composer feels it should be. Um, and so if I'm going to add reverbs, even in the Atmos scenario, I'm going to create. There are some, there are some, uh, uh, you know, uh, Exponential Audio has, which is one of the reverbs I use quite a bit, actually has it's a 9-1 setting,
Mm.
a reverb setting for some of their reverbs. Symphony 3D has a 9-1 capability. I mean, that's a built-in Atmos reverb. Um, or I create it. You can create it out of stereos. Now it's more of a setup to do,
Right.
but you can do that. But I would strongly urge you, if you're mixing in Atmos and you're doing reverbs, don't you know uh, you want to create your own. You want to do whatever it is you feel is right for your mixes. Uh, you know, create it in your mix.
Okay.
Because the next guy, um, you know, I wouldn't depend on him.
I understand.
I
Okay.
as I
Yeah.
said, I made the mistake. So long ago, and I wouldn't nowadays. I wouldn't even listen to this request. But I said, "Oh, listen, don't put any reverb on it, and we'll add it. We'll add it at the dub." Well,
Mm,
so I do this mix, no reverb, and it was an orchestral thing and all that, and trusting that in fact they were going to add. And so I so they're into the mix, and a few days go by, I don't hear anything. Like, I actually called the dubbing mixer, said, "Hey, uh, did you add? How'd you do with the reverb? Did you add any reverb?" He said, "Not a drop." That's a quote, and it was horrible. So imagine an orchestra with not a drop of or anything, without any reverb at all. And I'm like, oh my god, it was horrible. And uh, I've just said, well, never doing that again. And it was a huge mistake on my part, quite frankly. I don't blame anybody. It was my fault. I was stupid in listening to him. So don't make my mistake. You know, um, it's just always, when you do your mixes and your music, make it the best you can make it, and do what you think is right. And it's just the best way to go. It really is. And truth is, you can do a better job with all aspects of your music mixes than the dubbing mixer can. You just can. You have more latitude. You can deal more detail. You have more flexibility. It's what you do. The dubbing mixer basically is, louder, quieter. You know what I
right.
mean?
Okay. I get you. Okay.
They don't have the tools you have. They also
Okay.
don't have the expertise you have. So, you know, and again, it's not dissing anybody. Their job is different.
Right. Okay. I understand. I just was
Good.
kind of trying to get a picture in my mind, of how that process would go from, handing something off, to somebody and, giving that
Sure.
sort of way that they would, you know. Okay. Thank
Well,
you so much. I appreciate.
it, sure. It's a great question. Um, if I've done a lot of dubs. I've been in it, and I understand what the process is, and I understand the problems that you face in that environment. It's a different world. Um, so, uh, I think what you'll find is that they just, if you hand them a great sounding piece of music, they're loving you to death. That's it, because then they can do their thing, and they don't have to deal with anything else, and it's great for
Right.
them.
That makes sense. Thank you so
So,
much.
welcome.
There are a few questions that I'll read in a second, but Scott, go ahead.
Hey Dennis, how are you?
Hey, good. How you doing, Scott?
I'm pretty good. I had several questions, so I'll ask one, and I'm not sure how to ask any of the questions I have exactly, but I think this one is sort of similar to what we've been talking about. Like, what we watched you do basically was, if a composer wrote something, got it to where he got it, he sends it to you, and then you work your magic on it. and you sort of showed us how to work your magic on our own tracks. So my question sort of is, if Mark had, for example, done some of these things, put reverbs on these individual tracks the way you did and so forth, does that make it more difficult for you when you get it? Or would it be best for him to have done whatever he could have done, with compression and with the reverbs that you added and so forth? Because I'm always unclear as to, especially with reverb, what we're supposed to present to the next person.
Okay. That's a great question, Scott. If the next person is a mixer, a music mixer, if, in other words, you as composer, if you're handing off tracks to me to mix, I don't want any processing on it at all, period. I feel that I have, and I'll explain my reasoning. I feel I have more elements to work with. Talk about reverb. I have just analog wise. I have, I don't know, probably, I have 30, 40 channels of reverbs, just analog reverbs, let alone all the plugins I have. Some reverbs will work given the track, others aren't as effective. I can make those choices. If you print reverb on your tracks, I'm stuck with it. There's nothing I can do. That's the reverb I have to deal with.
And that would count even on a sound where the sound itself is a reverby sound. In other words, you're as the composition.
I'm glad you mentioned that. No, that wouldn't be the same. If the sound, if the reverb or delay or whatever effect is part of the sound itself and is an important component, I would actually request that you print it with that, because that's part of the sound. In other words, the sound, it is the sound, if you will. So for me to have to try to recreate that, it could take me a long time, and it may not be as good as what you did. It may not be, when I say it may not be what you want. And so I would, if it was me, I'd say, hey, Scott, send me your track with your effects on it. Period. But if it's just a track that, I'm not trivializing it, but I'm saying if it's just a regular, if it's just I've got a guitar, I've recorded a guitar, I've got an acoustic guitar I've recorded, I want it dry, because I'll be able to determine what's the best. Do I want to compress it or not? Do I want to, what kind of reverb do I want? How long of a reverb tail? As it sits in the track with everything else along with it. I can fine tune everything so it fits really nicely on my own once I get the mix together. And also, is it a stereo mix? Is it a multi-channel mix? Am I doing it's all these things are factors, and they all relate to everything I do. So if I have a dry, untreated track, that gives me the most flexibility to do what I need to do.
Would that be the same for panning and everything else? Compression
Yes.
and panning?
Yes.
So you would want you would just want a mono track for everything.
A mono or stereo.
Okay, but not necessarily moved to the left or the right the way you're going to do. Okay, cool.
Because
Thank you very much.
here's why. I always think about balance. So let's say, I have here's a mono. I have let's say it's a shaker. Now, shaker has, those things cut through really well in a track. You don't need a lot of level of them to hear them. But let's say I also have a drummer and he's got a hi-hat going and he's working, and I've got a shaker. Well, the hi-hat and a shaker occupy similar frequency range. So I'm going to want to be able to pan that shaker opposite of the hi-hat because it's going to sit in the track best and it's going to feel most balanced. Now, if it's already now in a mono track, it's the panning isn't if you're just printing a mono track, panning isn't an issue. But let's say it's a stereo track and you've already panned it. Now, ideally, I'm going to be able to do whatever panning I want anyway. But I'm just saying, if whatever mono or stereo tracks, I don't want any treatment, any decisions done ahead of time unless it's very, very specific to the sound of that particular track. And then that gives me the latitude to make those decisions. Then I can get the mix together, then we can discuss the mix. Because you may say, oh, I like what you did, but I wish this was a little louder, or that was, or do you have can we add a little more reverb to that, that kind of stuff, or can the reverb be a little brighter, or whatever, So we're discussing kind of over, really details, really the little. I want to talk about the little things, not so much the big, concept. Those things I usually deal with on my own.
This is as a composer sometimes could slow down your process the way I do it and just the way it is just me. Like 90% of the times I don't have the luxury of having someone like Dennis this mix my music. In fact, 99% of the times. And the 90% of the times I'm working on projects that are so fast paced that there is no time for mixing, unfortunately. And so the mix happens in the box. It happens in like my composing template. And to me, the way I have it organized, I've got like the hundreds of tracks loaded, and then all those tracks are routed to groups. The mix to me happening in those groups. All the reverbs, everything, compressions, everything that gets out there. That does a 10% of what Dennis could do. So it's kind of like raw pre-mix. It does a pretty good job if I don't have the time or the luxury of having a mixing engineer mix the music for me. But if I do, then I just bypass all the pannings and reverbs and compressors in the groups side of things. And so it's very easy for me to now export tracks dry kind of thing, right? Directly to Dennis. And so that's how I have it organized in my template, so I can turn on all the stuff, reverb, panning, etc. that it's doing a kind of like a raw mix if I don't have Dennis, for example. If that makes sense.
And the great thing, and some Mark is mentioning, if you understand these concepts, these mixing ideas, you can create the scenario, the templates that Mark is discussing. You can sort of pre-build things that work generally. They're not going to work every time. But at least it gives you a great starting place. It's like having a preset and a plugin. It's not that the preset's going to be perfect every single time, but they're great starting places. So if you understand all these, these mixing ideas and concepts that I'm discussing and all that we discuss together, these are things you can build into your templates that save you time. So when you have a project and you have a tight budget, you have a tight time frame, all these things help you move along. They help you do what you need to do. They save you time. And you already have in your mind, you can look at maybe even spot a project, or whether you get hired to do a project and you're spotting it, you're already thinking in your mind, not only do I have a good idea of what I'm going to write, but I know what I want it to sound like. And by saying I know what I want it to sound like, what you're really saying is I know how I want to mix it.
Yep.
And that's the kind of so much of it's all connected. It's all one thing. The
And
composition doesn't really exist without the mix.
and this is exactly why you wanna buy Dennis's course. Link in description. Just kidding, but but no, the cool thing, we were discussing this in the link is in the description. That's seriously, but we were discussing earlier in the chat how in this case how lucky I was that Dennis is mixing my music, because Dennis is mixing um all those sounds come from my template. They are there, and so when I see him using this plugin or this other plugin, those plugins end on my stems or my groups later on, because now permanently they're gonna be doing what Dennis did today. So kind of like in the course, this one or the other ones, or in a live stream like this, pay attention to what Dennis is doing. And the most important thing about, or what I value most about the course, is that he takes the time to explain the why. The why, to me, is very important, the why. And things like what he said last time, well, I use Studer for more robust sounds, and this other one for more delicate sounds. It's like, oh, that's because now that concept I can apply it to other tracks, because when you see him mixing, it applies to this specific context. Now I can expand the context. So understanding the why allows me to improve my template. So when I'm mixing the template, that's the mixing for me, to a percentage. Obviously, it's not the same thing that Dennis is doing, but
And
sessions like
also,
these are precious.
also want to protect your investment. You guys, you're serious about your music compositions, and it doesn't matter whether you're a hobbyist or you're a professional. You are investing your time, your energy, and in many cases you're making financial investments. You you know I want you guys to make smart investments in tools that you are comfortable with, that will work for you. And you aren't going to be able to do that without understanding what they are, what's out there, what at least from my perspective, what works well, what I've found. And I've got hundreds hundreds of plugins. Let's start there. Um, Honestly, I've bought, I've used them, and I've found, oh, here's something that actually is better. I go with that, and then I stop. If I bought something and I don't use it, it's kind of a waste of money. So I don't want to see anybody do that. There's some really good, very valuable, effective products, but so what I've tried to do is show you guys these tools that you may eventually want and be able to utilize. So that's also part of what I'm doing here. So it's this stuff. It's you're, like I said, in addition to your time and your energy, you're investing money, and you want to make wise investments in products that you're going to use and use a lot. So,
Awesome.
okay.
So we've got a few more minutes, not a lot, because same scenario like just like last week. Dennis is working on 2 projects at the moment. There are many questions. Some of you have asked me to read these questions. I'm gonna read some of them, but at some point in a few minutes, will be the end of the session. But kind of like in order. And if you've got questions, just raise your hand and ask the question directly. But some of you have asked me to read the question. So in order, there's a few for Danielle, and has a few. I'll start with the concerning mastering. I usually help myself with meters or loudness control to make sure that I have the right LUFS, LUFS, based on the type of use of the track it needs to have. Is it correct?
Yes, but depending on what the platform is, every a number of these platforms have different specs that they require. UMG has their own specs. Spotify has theirs. Apple Music has theirs. Netflix has theirs. Um, it's and regrettably there's no standardization. Metering, so the metering is very valuable. So I haven't set it up on this particular um, uh, uh, session, but yes, if you do your own mastering, you definitely want to pay attention to levels.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a number of good metering plugins that help you with that. In addition, they have the ability to you can change. They'll have a menu, a drop down menu of whatever particular spec you're looking at. So that's built in. So you can look at a Spotify spec or Netflix spec, or so there's some good ones. But yes, if you do your own mastering, then you want to pay attention to that. You actually have to.
Awesome. Um, in this session, you didn't use them, but in the course, you do. So you can see it there. And there's a question that has been repeated. So reverbs. So this is another question from Daniel, but has been repeated. So by using many different reverb sets and different plugins, don't I risk masking effects that are difficult to detect unless I have a very trained ear? And this question has been repeated as well. And it's like, why different reverbs? Don't we have to make it sound as if they were all playing the same room, kind of thing?
Yes and no. Again, if it's just the orchestral elements, excuse me, the obvious orchestral elements, strings, brass, woodwinds, etc., I'll use the same reverbs for that. And as I explained, typically a room and a hall. And I want to create this sense of a orchestral setting. However, if it's a hybrid type piece of music, like this is very much a hybrid kind of music. We have strings and some brass and one contrabassoon, but we also have all these bigger drum elements. This type of track gives you the flexibility to use where you're not really necessarily creating an orchestral performance. You're creating a piece of music that it has a different function. As I envision this, I imagine this as a cue let's say, in a movie. It has a different function. It's not trying to be an orchestral performance. It's trying to be a piece of music that's pushing a scene along. And that gives me the flexibility to do what I need, what I feel really works well sonically. And by doing that, I can create different reverbs and whatever. I don't have to think, oh, well, gee, this whole drum array should sound like it's in an orchestral setting. So it just depends on the piece of music and what what you're trying to present, what the mix is trying to do. If it's an orchestral piece, and then yes, for the most part, I'm using kind of the same reverbs throughout. But again, that's even going to vary depending on the sample, as I discussed. How is it recorded? Does the sample itself have a lot of room sound on it, or not, or is it extremely present? So there's variation. There's no like single approach. In other words, it just depends on uh, what the piece of music is doing, what the purpose is, what the focus is, and also again what the samples are doing and how they were recorded. And part of very much component of the artistry of mixing is understanding all this and realizing, okay, here's what this music is supposed to be doing, and now I mix accordingly.
Awesome. There's a question here that just came in. Could you discuss the differences between Dennis's two courses as far as what's covered? And that's interesting that you can answer this question. I sent an email explaining kind of like the mixing for composers. The old one is a series. It's more catered to pros. It's a series of walkthroughs. It's like, well, this is this track mixed, and here's what I did. The Denison's method, the new one, is more for beginners, and you're gonna see live mixing, sort of like, let me show you how I do this step by step, and it covers some foundational aspects of mixing. That's how I kind of like tried to simplify. But Dennis, what would be your take on this?
They're really so. As I in creating these two pro series, the beginning mixing is truly sort of an introductory. It covers the very basics of things like signal flow. In other words, understanding, excuse me, how the signal travels through the workstation, and as a signal travels, how I'm affecting it, and what place in the process the effect sits. So in other words, do I want to add an EQ or a compressor? Initially, as the track, the sound enters my channel, where that sits. Now I want to add reverb, where that sits. How do I return the reverb into the mix? How do I create stems? In other words, it's the infrastructure and the setup and the initial process of mixing. That's for those who are really new at mixing, who haven't really done it before, who are obviously very, very interested. They're composers or songwriters, whatever, but they want to be able to learn to mix. And it's the sort of introductory course to get you to a place where once you complete it, then you can move to the next series, which is more advanced and covers 4 different genres of music and how I would approach each one for mixing. And so that's the idea of the two separate programs.
Cool. Let's do 2 more questions, and then we're gonna be done. And I can read. There are many. Adam?
Hi, everybody. I have a question. I'm not sure it's for, maybe it's from Mark mostly, because I enrolled the course of Dennis Method, and it's awesome. It's amazing. Thank you, Danny. And I'm grateful for the opportunity to be in that class.
Thank you.
My question is, I like the idea of VCR tracks, and it's amazing, and you explained it makes sense totally. And I try to reproduce it in my Cubase, but my question is, how do I get support if things they don't work for that class? Because that's a video, or not have direct interaction, and it's not Danny's job to fix my Cubase problems. But the VCR I created, they came out without the fader, and I wasn't sure was a glitch on my system or is something that I'm missing.
That's a great question, Adam. So not to take what I would do is ask me this question on the Thursdays chats that I'm always there, and I'll help if I can. If you are a little bit more impatient, and just to not take more time off this room, but if you're a little bit more impatient, just email us or me directly at mark@cinematic or esteban@cinematiccomposing.com. We'll get back to you within the day generally, unless holidays or things like this. If you are even more impatient than that, we've got the tech thing, the tech AI thing that can help. But for sure, I would say in the live class I can help. I personally don't use PCAs for my composing project in Cubase, but I'll try to help. Yes, no problem.
Okay, no, thank you. That's all I had.
Anyone else that wants to ask the question live? We're good. Okay, so a couple of questions here. Red, what limiter would you recommend from UA?
The UA plugins are really great. They've got. Let me take a look here. I'm going to go and just see what. So they've got a number that are really, really excellent. An 1176, this guy. Let's come up there. This is a terrific limiter. These are very, very common. They're very popular. They're great for vocals. They're great for, kind of darn near anything. They're as I say, they're very versatile. UA makes phenomenally great plugins. As I say though, they're the two things is they're at least in my system they're powered, which means they require a card for them. Or if you have UA hardware, they do make their own hardware, which is excellent. You can use their plugins in that. But this is a great choice. Another wonderful plugin which they make. Let me go down here. Is this LA2A? This is also these are all kind of older, based on older plugins. Were amazingly popular. They just actually are reissuing these. There's tube compressors. These are great on bass, vocals. Also, really a wonderful sounding compressor. Honestly, with UA plugins, it's hard to go wrong. They do make really, really great, wonderful sounding, useful plugins, but they're only stereo. They don't do any multi-channel. For those, I don't know, I'm sure most of you are only working in stereo. So that's not an issue. But I would certainly look at those two, the 1176 and the LA2A are very, very popular, versatile, useful plugins. Great compressors.
Thank you. And the last one is going to be came way halfway through the session, and it has to be once again about reverbs. What is happening? This from Jeffrey Gold. What is happening, and what is the fix when the tail of a reverb, for example, Eventide or Black Hole, is sounding less laminar, quote unquote, and becomes, quote unquote, digital artifact sounding?
That's a good question. I'm not sure I can even answer that. I would, if you're having trouble, Jeffrey, with reverb tails, I'm wondering if there's some issue with either the plugin itself. You might try reinstalling. If it's just, I don't really experience much in the way of, kind of digital artifacts. So is it I would tend to look at the plugin itself. You shouldn't be getting any issues with the reverb tails. They should be pretty clean. So there, you have some technical thing going on, and I'm not the guy to answer the question, unfortunately.
If
But I would look towards some, like I said, some technical aspect in your system. Not necessarily your system, maybe the plugin itself. Like I said, try reinstalling and going from there.
if this was happening to me, and if the plugin was perfectly, it works perfectly, but you don't like if you're using this Black Hole with kind of like super long reverbs, right? And the last part of the tail, like I'm talking like the 5, the 10, the 15 seconds reverb, which is really good for. And you don't like the last part of it, to me personally, and if the plugin is perfectly functional, it's like just try different either a different plugin or a different preset, or tweak the settings. But I just like Dennis, I go through presets like the one that I like, then a few tweaks, and that's it. But back in the day, it was hard to find a really good sounding plugin reverb. These days, we've got so many options. We're so lucky. And
Yeah,
it,
you're absolutely right. That reverbs were the worst offenders in the early days of plugins. Most reverbs were awful, and it was a real downside. They were the last thing to sort of be perfected. But nowadays, Mark's right. There are some really, really excellent choices to make. They're very useful and reasonably priced, and also they've come a long way.
Thank you, Dennis and Mark.
thank you for the questions, and
Thank
thanks
you.
everyone else for the questions. The questions kept coming in. Unfortunately, and I apologize that we couldn't make this session longer, that not being able to answer all the questions. Maybe a few weeks after the course, if depending on Dennis' availability, there's not a promise, there may be an opportunity to answer some final questions and some comments from the course. This always is a good opportunity for us to gather some feedback from you guys as well. So it's a good win-win, and we'd love if we could put this together. But other than that, just wanted to appreciate Dennis' time and all of your time as well. We had this wasn't such a big session as the last one, but we had 50-60 people in the room and another 50-60 on YouTube. So again, that's why we got so many questions. Couldn't answer all of them, but we will if we have a chance in a future session. Other than that, thanks everyone again, even for being here in a holiday season.
And thank you from me. Appreciate everybody. Appreciate your time, and your interest and your great questions, and I wish everybody the absolute best, and keep mixing.
Keep mixing. All right. Thank you, everyone.
Okay.
Have a great one.
All right.
Thanks, Dennis. Talk soon.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you so much for your time, Dennis.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you.